Let's start with a question that sounds completely impossible. How does a country with more oil, literally more oil than Saudi Arabia, a country that was once so rich its money was worth more than the US dollar, how does that nation completely collapse into a humanitarian crisis? I mean, it just doesn't make any sense, right? Well, this is the unbelievable story of how the world's richest oil nation fell apart.
I mean, just look at this contrast. It's so stark, it's hard to believe we're talking about the same place. On one side, you have the Venezuela of the 50s, 60s, and 70s. They called it the South American Paris. People were flying in on Concorde jets just to go shopping. And on the other side, you have today, an exodus of over 7 million people, hyperinflation so bad money is worthless, and a daily struggle just to survive. So, the question is, how on earth did they get from there to here?
To really get our heads around this, we're going to break the story down into 5 key parts. We'll start with the gift and the curse, then look at how they were riding the oil wave. After that, we'll dive into the revolutionary's gamble, which leads right into the total economy in freefall, and finally, we'll see how Venezuela became a geopolitical battleground.
All right, so let's start at the beginning. Picture it, 1914. The world is stumbling into the First World War. Venezuela is, a pretty poor agricultural country, mostly known for its coffee. But then, drillers hit something big. It wasn't just some oil. Venezuela had basically just won the geological lottery.
Yeah, that's 304 billion barrels of oil. That's the largest proven reserve on the entire planet. But here's the twist. This incredible gift came with a kind of hidden poison. You see, it turns out, not all oil is created equal.
So this is super important. The oil you find in Saudi Arabia is light and sweet. It flows easily, it's cheap to get out of the ground. Venezuela's oil, it's the exact opposite. It's extra heavy crude. Think of it like asphalt or tar. Getting this stuff out of the ground is incredibly expensive and technically really, really difficult. And this little detail, this vulnerability, would come back to haunt them in a huge way.
So how does all this incredible wealth actually become a curse? Well, it's because of a classic economic trap. It's got a kind of a weird name that you might have heard before. What exactly is Dutch disease?
Now, it sounds complicated, but I promise you it's not. It's a really simple, destructive process that unfolds in 4 steps. And in Venezuela, well, it played out like a perfect, tragic textbook example.
And this is the trap right here. It happens step by step. First, you've got this flood of US dollars coming in from selling oil. That makes your local currency super strong. So strong, in fact, that it suddenly becomes way cheaper to just buy everything from other countries instead of making it yourself. Think about it. Food, clothes, you name it. Why bother farming when you can import it for less? So that's exactly what happened. Local farms and factories just withered away. And by the 1950s, the entire country, its entire fate, was hanging by a single thread, the global price of oil.
Now, for a good long while, being dependent on oil felt amazing. It felt like a superpower. Cash was just flowing in, and Venezuela felt totally invincible. They were even a founding member of OPEC. And they just rode that massive oil price boom of the 1970s to levels of wealth that are hard to even imagine. The party, it seemed, would never end.
This was a huge moment of national pride. They basically decided, hey, these are our resources, and they kicked out all the foreign oil companies to take control. But there was a catch. To buy out those huge companies, Venezuela had to go into massive debt. And they made a huge bet that oil prices would stay high forever. Well, they were wrong.
And then, out of nowhere, a player that nobody expected entered the game, the Soviet Union. They were desperate for cash, so they cranked up oil production in Siberia and just flooded the world market with cheap oil. Prices totally collapsed, and Venezuela, now drowning in debt from nationalizing their industry, couldn't pay its bills. They had to go ask for an international bailout, which came with some really brutal strings attached.
The government was forced to bring in these harsh austerity measures, slashing subsidies, cutting programs. The final straw, the thing that lit the fuse, was a small increase in the bus fare in the capital, Caracas. The city just exploded. The riots and the incredibly bloody military crackdown that followed killed thousands of people, and it created the perfect political vacuum for a charismatic new leader to step in.
And that man was a former paratrooper named Hugo Chavez. He'd actually led a failed coup attempt back in '92, but he got elected president in 1998. And his timing? Well, it was absolutely perfect. Right as he took office, China's economy started booming, which kicked off this massive global demand for raw materials, especially oil.
Get this. Oil prices went from just $10 a barrel when he was elected to a mind-blowing peak of $147 in 2008.
It was a tsunami of cash. So what did Chavez do with all this money? He launched these huge social programs, free healthcare, subsidized food, new housing. For millions of poor Venezuelans, it honestly felt like a dream come true.
But while all that was happening on the surface, something disastrous was brewing underneath. In 2002, the skilled workers at the state oil company, it's called PDVSA, they all went on strike. So you got to ask, wait a minute, if the country is so rich, why are its most important workers walking off the job?
It's because they were the experts, the engineers, the geologists. They could see that Chavez was taking every single dollar of profit to pay for his social programs and leaving absolutely nothing behind to reinvest in the oil fields, for critical maintenance, for exploration, for keeping the whole thing running. Chavez saw this as a personal betrayal, so he went on live television and, one by one, he fired all 20,000 of them. And he replaced them with political allies who knew absolutely nothing about the oil industry.
And this move created the central, crazy paradox of the Chavez years. You can see it right here. Even as the price of oil was shooting to the moon, the actual amount of oil Venezuela was producing was going down. The complex machinery was breaking, the fields were neglected, and all the experts who knew how to fix it were gone.
Hugo Chavez died from cancer in 2013, and he left his hand-picked successor, a guy named Nicolas Maduro, in charge. Now, Maduro inherited a system that was already completely hollowed out, already rotting from the inside. And then, everything that could possibly go wrong went wrong all at the same time. First, the shale revolution in the U.S. meant that America, which had been Venezuela's biggest customer, suddenly became its biggest competitor. Then, global oil prices just crashed. And on top of all that, the United States hit them with crippling economic sanctions. With the country's only source of income basically gone, Maduro's government made a fatal choice. If we can't earn any money, we'll just print.
And the result was one of the worst cases of hyperinflation in modern history. In 2018 alone, the annual inflation rate hit 130,000%. A number that big it's almost meaningless. It's hard to even wrap your head around. So let's make it real. What did that actually look like for a regular person on the street?
Okay, imagine this. At the start of the year, a single egg costs you 100 bolivars. By the end of that same year, that one egg costs $1 million. Your entire life savings, your pension, the cash in your wallet. It all just turned into worthless paper, almost overnight. And to make things even worse, the government tried to fix this by putting in strict price controls. They forced stores to sell things for less than they paid for them. You can guess what happened next. Empty shelves, massive shortages, and a full-blown humanitarian disaster. So you have this total economic meltdown. And you have to ask yourself, how is the government still in power? I mean, how did the Maduro regime survive all of this? Well, the answer is that this crisis stopped being just about Venezuela. It went global. It became a pawn in a bigger power struggle.
The regime found new friends, new lifelines. Russia jumped in with military and diplomatic support at the UN, and maybe most importantly, China stepped in with billions and billions of dollars in loans with a simple deal. You can pay us back later in oil. Chinese companies even brought in new tech that let Venezuela get that heavy crude out of the ground without using any American parts, bypassing the sanctions.
So what can we take away from all this? From being the South American Paris to a state of near total collapse, Venezuela's story is a brutal, modern-day lesson about the resource curse. It proves that just having a great treasure, having all the oil in the world, is no guarantee of success. In fact, without strong institutions, without a diverse economy, and without very, very careful planning, that treasure can become the very thing that leads to a nation's destruction.